Welcome to The Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm Maz, and I speak to soldiers, academics, refugees, peacemakers, and anyone else who's been touched by war in the hope of demystifying and, most importantly, de-glorifying it. If you like what you hear, please consider showing your support by reviewing the show wherever you get your pods. You can also support us on our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page. Links to both are in the show notes. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Today, I'm speaking with Arne Dalhaug and Wolfgang Sporrer, both of whom I recently interviewed independently about the crisis in Ukraine. I will link both episodes in the show notes, which include more extensive bios for both of my guests. Suffice to say that Arne is a retired 3-star Norwegian Army officer who also served as a senior officer in NATO and more recently as a senior leader at the OSCE in Ukraine. Wolfgang is currently an Adjunct Professor at the Hertie School in Berlin and was recently the head of the Human Dimension Department of the OSCE in Ukraine, where he led the civilian aspects of conflict management and facilitated and promoted dialogue between the opposing sides. Anyone that has listened to our previous discussions knows how intimately familiar both of these gentlemen are with the depths and complexity of the current situation. They join me today to discuss the invasion, the current crisis, and possible future outcomes. Arne and Wolfgang, thank you both for joining me once again on The Voices of War.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So, gentlemen, since we spoke last time, which was only a few weeks ago, Putin made his move and invaded Ukraine nearly 4 days ago now. Up until the invasion, there was still a lot of hope that a peaceful resolution might be possible. What do you think tipped the scales? In other words, why did Putin ultimately decide to pull the trigger, so to speak? Maybe we can start with Arne. You look like you were about to start talking, so we'll start with you.
First of all, let me admit that what I've written about the war and what could happen, I've mostly been correct about. Of course, I underestimated definitely Putin's willingness to be more reckless than I expected, no doubt about that. And I'm still quite puzzled that at the end of the day, he chose to press the red button, actually. And of course, the big question is, was it the plan all the time? I mean, diplomacy, everything was just a smokescreen, or maybe it could have taken a different course. Of course, we don't know that for sure. But I'm quite surprised to learn that he actually chose this way forward, because everything that I have predicted in my writings about what could be the possible consequences, they are very obvious already, and probably stronger than even I expected. So we can discuss a few things about these issues, but I think it's fair to say that Putin has underestimated three very important factors, actually. And the first one is how united the West has been. And of course, Putin has made them even more united. The second factor, I think, is he has underestimated the willingness and the hardness of the resistance from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have been doing, magnificently well against superior forces. And we can discuss that also from a military point of view. And the third thing I think that is important, and also Putin underestimated, is how unpopular the war is in Russia. And that is before all the body bags are coming back. So in my first article already in November, I said, this has a potential if he should opt for war. I mean, it could actually, actually challenge the regime itself at the end of the day. I mean, that possibility is present.
Yeah,
I leave it there.
Absolutely. Wolfgang, what's your thoughts?
Well, I largely agree with many things that Arne said now. Just a couple of points to add. there seem to be more and more indications now, some intercepted communications between Kadyrov of Chechnya and the Russian authorities, that it had actually been decided up to like 1 week before it actually happened. One has to be extremely careful with this information because the fog of war is there, and there is so much disinformation there. But what I read, this could very well have been the case. And when you look back for 1 week, it also kind of somehow falls into place with, the recognition, with the first steps to prepare to recognize the Donbass regimes, this fake Security Council meeting, which was terrible, followed by, military assistance, etc., etc. So it appears from, on the one hand, some alleged intelligence, I would call it, and on the other hand, from the things that happened on the ground, that indeed the decision was taken a week before before it actually happened. Again, I'm saying this with care, but when you look at actually what's out there, that appears not improbable. The second thing, why was that decision taken? I mean, when you look at Putin's, and I must say, increasingly rambling and horrible and aggressive pronouncements, you will first hear that it's actually about the West, that it's about the West not providing security guarantees. Then it's about, the fate of the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. Most recently, it's about the denazification of the Ukrainian regime, which I interpret as a modern way to say regime change. And finally, it's all underpinned also sometimes by the argumentation that Ukraine actually is not really a country that's real. Ukraine is kind of a part of Russia, and that's kind of the reason for much of the action. So we don't really know what was even his, let's say, his purported reason for this attack. He has been pointing in all kinds of different directions. At the end of the day, I do believe that Putin finds it extremely difficult or impossible to work with the Zelenskyy regime. Zelenskyy has many things he does not have. He's a politician with a completely different style, with a completely different outlook on the world, and let us not forget about that. That has never been really talked about much. Zelenskyy has more social media followers and more fans in Russia than Putin himself. Wow. As a comedian, as an actor. But Zelenskyy is a popular figure inside Russia. We should not forget that. So he probably thought, with this guy, I cannot work, and it's impossible to have this guy around. We must get rid of this guy. So that's probably one thing. And I agree very much with Arne on one aspect that he mentioned. That's the unpopularity of the conflict in Russia. And there, what we do see in Russia is a really growing, let's say, information gap between the people who do nothing except watch TV, rural regions, also above a certain age, who don't use internet, and the younger population who actually does use internet, with whom actually Zelenskyy's address to the Ukrainian people is going to the Russian people. I'm sorry. He spoke directly to the Russian people. Yeah, in Russian. Amongst young urban internet users, this is becoming viral inside Russia.
That's really interesting, because I think one of the demographic facts about Russia is that, unlike much of the rest of the world, it doesn't have an aging population at the moment. It's actually quite got a rather large young population from the 17 to 25, which I think was why Putin changed the compulsory military age as well, to match giving him the next 15 years quite a big bulge of a young population of particularly young men that he could send to the army. So this potentially, by what you're saying, is that could ultimately prove his undoing by the very fact that these young people are very socially connected, and of course, spoken to directly in their own language by the president of the country that they've just invaded. I mean, that's an incredible insight.
Indeed, and what the last point I would like to make in terms of the Russian population, I just read a tweet by somebody of the Russian analyst community who is also a friend of mine, who never was anti-Putin. I mean, you cannot be a very let's say high-level analyst who speaks on TV and who speaks everywhere and be like radically anti-Putin. He was kind of, flowing on the waves of what you need to do, works in Carnegie, Moscow, to not, drop out of the, let's say, he was never a fan of Putin, but he was never,
Yeah.
And he now basically has positioned himself completely against Putin. And he says that many people in Russia, in the analyst community, in the intelligentsia, are saying there's really in a pickle, as they say, we cannot wish our own army defeat in the field, but we can also not wish for our own country for destruction in the future. So we are really in a bind of what to wish for in this conflict. So this aspect that Arne has made, I think we're going to see more of that, and that's going to intensify. But speak about this maybe later.
Yeah, Arne, you were nodding for most of that. Did you want to add something else to that?
No, not really. I mean, I think what Wolfgang said is really interesting, and it reinforces my impression that the importance of all this new social media is playing out in a way that we probably haven't seen before. I mean, we touched upon it in a couple of minutes before you joined us, Wolfgang, but I think that's an interesting topic to explore a little further.
Well, let's talk about that now, because that's kind of quite relevant. Particularly given that we're talking over Zoom, across. I'm in the Gold Coast in Australia. Arne, you're in Oslo. Wolfgang, you're in Brussels. I mean, that in itself is rather unique for the modern commentary of battlefields. But certainly, Twitter and Facebook have been very, very prominent and active, and to the point where, as you and I talked briefly, Arne, there are military experts from around the world giving tips on urban warfare to people in Kiev. How to resist, armored penetration into a city. Where to target tanks with Molotov cocktails. Where to throw blankets to prevent their, the equipment working and impeding vision, etc. Or how to make chicanes on the streets, these kinds of things. I mean, surely that's something very new, but it also, as it seems, it's really brought the war into the civilian domain, probably more so than previously. Civilians are active participants. They are no longer passive victims of war, or at least that's my impression, right? And that's what we're seeing in the media as well. The Ukrainians are kind of lining up en masse to pick up arms and defend the country. What are your thoughts on the influence of social media in this regard?
Well, if I may start on that, I mean, the influence of social media is absolutely gigantic. It forms opinions, it forms narratives. It's used as a hybrid weapon on all sides. If I may tell a little anecdote that I have heard actually from two sides, I cannot vouch if that anecdote is absolutely true, but it appears true from me knowing Ukraine and Russia. It could be true. It is that Ukraine is using Tinder. Tinder, it's a dating app, a matchmaking app, to extract the information from Russian invading soldiers, because Russian invading soldiers are actually looking for, partners, Tinder matches in their immediate environment where they are like on the invasion. And then this fake profile of a good-looking woman would actually start a conversation with that Russian soldier on Tinder, while it's actually a Ukrainian intelligence officer trying to extract information about positions, about movements, etc., etc. So not only you find this outstanding, and I find it outstanding as well, along the fact that a Russian soldier would go matching in Tinder with the people that he is about to invade.
So the couple of questions strike me as, that's one. That's one question. But also I thought it was made quite public that Russian soldiers were not allowed to have any phones on them. So that also strikes me as, of course, soldiers being soldiers, and Arne will laugh undoubtedly. Surely some have smuggled their phones in, but that's next level intelligence collection.
It is an incredible story.
Wow!
And even if it's not true, which I don't exclude, it's too good not to be told. Exactly. So I don't vouch for it, but I've read it on numerous occasions, and somebody told me about it.
I'll just jump in there before Arne jumps in as well. I think that's also a really interesting point. It really doesn't matter if it's true or not, because if it's creating sufficient humor, rapport, a liking of the Ukrainian people from the rest of the world, same as the ghost of Kiev, right? We don't know if that pilot is real or not. It doesn't matter. People need heroes, and this is the mythology that people are embracing. It's giving them hope. Whether it's real or not almost doesn't matter, right? Sorry, Arne, I think I cut you off. You're about to jump in.
Well, I really like the Tinder story, and it could very well be true. And of course, what one might add is that it's not the first time that good-looking women are playing a role during conflicts and war, but of course not Tinder.
That's certainly new.
But let's return a little, because from the very beginning of this buildup of Russian forces, for the first time, we should remember that this is the first really big war that's played out, actually not only in Europe but also in the world, after open source intelligence has established itself as a factor. And it started to work immediately, because you have investigative journalists like in Bellingcat, and you have all the commercial satellites, which actually also the SMM used when Wolfgang and I were around in Luhansk. And I also think that the Biden administration played very well with the intelligence, and it made it exceptionally difficult for Russia to come up with some false narrative about what was going on. And they released information from the US, which were very accurate, really. But what is even more important is that this could be confirmed from open sources, which, of course, added credibility to what the administration said. So the possibility to spin wild stories about what was going on coming from the Russian side was basically, it was not possible. And also then, in addition, comes the wired world, as I call it. And of course, people are connected in very different ways, and we can actually see the war playing out on different social media in a way we really haven't been able to see before, because this is the first time we have a conflict in a country under attack, where you have complete access to internet, and also you have free media, and there's no restrictions. They can put out whatever they like. And all the videos I've seen this morning are quite devastating, seen from the Russian point of view. And of course, this is influencing and hardening the positions in Europe. Because the population in Europe, in the free world, is watching what's going on. And that will for sure give the politicians leverage when they take the next turn on what to do with sanctions on Russia. So this is going on many different levels, and we can see it play out. And what Wolfgang said about the social media, for sure, I do agree with. I think we are touching upon something that is exceptionally important and something that we have just seen the beginning.
Yeah, and I guess in this war, it's not the kind of CNN factor, right? It's now the social media factor. And we're also seeing, organizations, companies, YouTube, Facebook, who are now stopping monetization of, say, RT, Russia Today channels. Elon Musk, I mean, I'm sure you've both seen that, has just, responded to a tweet of the vice president of Ukraine, and he's made satellites available to give redundancy to the internet in Ukraine. I mean, this is new. We're now seeing the world civilians, not institutions, but organizations, civil society, and civilians actively participating in the resistance to this war. I think that's a rather unique change. Yeah, Wolfgang, please.
If I may add one thing to the social media aspect here, I think which is extremely important, is that this social media angle with Twitter, with Facebook, with all the app, TikTok, I mean, let's not underestimate Reddit, where people really get a lot of information, actively put spokes in the wheels of government disinformation. Because some of our listeners will not know what Russian TV is at the moment putting out about the war. There is no mention of attacks on Kiev. There is no mention of trying to, assassinate Zelenskyy or something like that. In the Russian media, this is a war. No, it's not a war. It's a special military operation to protect the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. That's what it is. No talk about the three-pronged attack from the south, from the north, and from the east. Zero. And this is because the Russian people, large parts of the Russian people, would simply, in my view, be extremely discontent if Russia would be attacking what they really consider to be their brotherly people. I'm not sure this is reciprocated so much from the Ukrainian side, but the feelings from the Russian side in the average population are real in this regard. So what the Russian military, what Putin is doing at the moment, he has to lie about it in his own media in order to be even able to continue. And that is being undermined by the social media, by young people showing on their phone videos to their parents who are only watching, Россия 24 and Первый канал. So, yes, and that's another aspect that is extremely important about social media in this conflict.
That's really interesting, and I think the kind of information war piece. I think Zelenskyy, it was interesting that he's more popular than Putin, but I think we also have to give him credit. I mean, and I'll be keen to hear your thoughts, but he's really come through in this as a true leader. I mean, he was initially, some had doubts about him being a comedian, that he was never really meant for this position, despite having acted it in a popular TV series, that it was all a bit of a joke. But he's really, in my view at least, and certainly in the view of many others, I'm certainly not unique in this view, but he's really come through as a standout leader, galvanizing his people, being out there on a daily basis, being seen more so than Putin, certainly. Now, what are your thoughts on that and that kind of information campaign that he's leading?
Well, I mean, I can briefly touch upon that. I must admit that I've never been that much impressed by Zelenskyy before now. And also the weeks and months leading up to the war, I was thinking that his performance was pretty much mediocre, to be honest. But now, I mean, he comes across as a statesman in this absolutely serious situation of Ukraine under attack. And I think he has performed marvelously. I mean, whatever happens, I mean, he will go down in history as one of the big ones. Whatever happens from now on, actually. So I think he has done marvelously well so far.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
I think Zelenskyy is doing one thing extremely well, that he has always done extremely well, and that is to communicate with his people. He was not elected with 72% over an incumbent president for no reason. When you looked at Zelenskyy's TV appearances, at his speeches, at the videos he produced, when he was communicating with his own people, it was always genuine, with some humor, with a sense of gravitas, just absolutely perfectly. He may not have been as good in other things of the daily management of the state, but fortunately for Ukraine and fortunately for him, his ability to really communicate extremely effectively, on the one hand, with his own people, but on the other hand, also with global leaders. I mean, his speech at the Munich Security Conference, I'm not sure you have seen it, was one of the most impressive parts of high-level political communication that I've ever seen. So his ability, his genius in communication really is really now, at the height of the demand. So this is what I think. As for me, that he's communicating well is not a surprise for me at all.
Yeah, and just shows the importance of communication in the leadership piece. I mean, we can never underestimate it, and I think that's obviously where Putin's losing as well. I mean, his style of communication, where he embarrasses some of his key leaders rather than empowers them. I think that works to his favor. But let's now get to the, I guess, the current situation. And Arne, maybe I'll start with you here because this is really your forte. What the hell happened with the myth of the Russian military might? We can't skip that question because the world has lived under the shadow in one way or another, at least of the myth of Putin's army and the Red Army and, the military might. But they have to say that they have been embarrassed would probably be an understatement. But so far, at least, knock on wood, they have really not performed to what one would expect or had expected of Russia. What's your thoughts?
Well, basically, the performance of the Russian military is not a big surprise to me, because being a military over many years and having watched the Russian military, they do have some strength and they do have a lot of weaknesses. I could add that it goes for the Chinese military, but that would make the podcast length of about a week. But but for sure, I mean that's nothing new. And I mean it's typical that some of the Russian soldiers that are taken prisoners, they don't even know why they are there. I mean, they think they are on an exercise. And I mean, that's the same kind of society we see, because the truth is never communicated to people. I mean, there is always, George Kennan wrote about this back in 1948. He said that in Russia, the truth really doesn't exist. I mean, whatever happened in the past is remolded, and it's remolded in such a way that it fits the present. And if there is a need, the past will again be remolded to what is needed. So there is no truth is not a constant. And it's the same we can see also going on here. I mean, the strong part of the Russian military is the firepower. That comes from everything from cruise missiles, aircraft, down to artillery. That's the strong arm, a lot of brutal firepower. But of course, now that the Russians have to improvise what is going on during the fighting. And I've been quite surprised that they picked urban fighting this early, because the Russian army is not at all trained in urban fighting. One could say that the Ukrainian is not either. But if you are defending, you always have a big advantage in urban areas. And of course, as Wolfgang alluded to, people are posting on the video on the internet how to make Molotov cocktails, how to defend against the armored vehicles in urbanized terrain, and so on and so on. And of course, going into urban warfare voluntarily, that's quite a risk. And obviously, the Russian army has suffered quite heavy casualties in this area. And if it wasn't for the fact that they have air superiority, I think that the Ukrainians could actually be taking the offensive against them in these areas. And I think the Ukrainians have planned so far the defense of Kiev very well. Kiev seems to be well defended. They have an open area to the west, to the southwest, and the Russian trying to encircle the city has not been successful at all. So for the time being, I think that this is going much better than I expected for the Ukrainians. We also need to remember that the Russians so far have not committed all their forces. They do have a lot more forces to commit, and they do have a lot more firepower. But of course, as the war drags on, things are getting more difficult. You need to improvise. There are no plans that you can follow, and so on. And the Russians are not good at improvising. They are good at, running forward with a lot of firepower behind them. And it doesn't always work. Also we should remember, if you take the map of Ukraine and you look at where the Russian forces are now, be aware that they are just in some very, very tiny parts of Ukraine on the big map. Ukraine is an enormous country. And for the time being, they are just present in very, very small percentage of the total of Ukraine. You can get the impression that the war is going on everywhere, but it isn't. It's in the south. It's in the areas where Wolfgang and I spent some time together in the Donbass, and it's up in the northern area around Kiev and to the east of Kiev. But the areas on a map that is colored red are actually quite small. That also points to the problem it will be to occupy and pacify Ukraine, even if you should change the regime in Kiev. How do you want that regime to govern beyond the reach of Russian bayonet, beyond the zones that are occupied by Russia? So I will stop there. I'm sure that Wolfgang also has some views on that.
Yeah. Please jump in, Wolfgang. Yeah.
I want to kind of come back to something that Arne said before, and this is a number of Russian miscalculations. I think you used that word, and I will add to this. As it appears, the Russian initial assault plan was designed in a way to basically decapitate Ukraine within 1 or 2 days, to achieve a very quick victory over Kiev, to basically topple the president, and therefore kind of be in the driving seat of whatever happens next. The plan was also, it appears, because it's the only chance to do this in any way, to minimize civilian casualties, not to have so-called a total war, but rather like an extremely strong and fast blitzkrieg against the capital. I think we can already say that this plan has failed. This initial plan has already failed. I think there is no more question to be asked. And of course, this is, on the one hand, something hopeful for the Ukrainian side. But let us not forget that it is also something that could result in a very large deterioration, particularly for civilians on the ground, as the Russian Federation may well depart from the strategy to minimize civilian casualties, or to minimize casualties as such, as much as possible, and let's switch to a tactic of all-out total war, whatever it takes to achieve the goal. So I think we need to be very circumspect here, because I believe after this first phase has not gone in the way how Russia probably wanted it. Very pessimistically, I can say I think we have worse days. We may have worse days ahead of us in terms of what happens with the civilian population, civilian infrastructure, civilian buildings, etc., in the next days. So that as a caveat.
And of course, given what we know of Putin so far, that he's been very hard-headed about pursuing his end states, this would surely come as a really big shock. Well, I'm sure he's very angry about what's happening, but also that's very dangerous because he needs to prove a point. A loss would be rather embarrassing for him. Yes, jump in, Arne, please.
Yeah, I mean, let me just follow up on. I agree 100% with Wolfgang here, and I also basically alluded to this. I said the Russian firepower in all aspects so far has not been brought into play. And I also tweeted just a couple of days ago that, I mean, we should remember the First and Second Chechen War, what Grozny looked like. And of course, I think that the Russian infantry is not trained and in a position to pursue urban warfare in a professional way. I mean, everything points in that direction. And that means firepower will be the leverage seen from the Russian side. And that plays into what Wolfgang said. That's going to be some horrible days ahead also for the Ukrainian civilians if that plays out. Of course, I mean, if this is playing out for days and weeks to come, I mean, what will be the reaction to this from the rest of the world? And Putin also has to take this into consideration. I mean, what I alluded to a few minutes ago, all these videos are really hardening the positions in the West and shaping the negative impression of Russia and Putin's regime among people in Europe. I mean, just imagine, I mean, Germany has decided to send weapons to Europe.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up.
What a change that is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not talking about the UK. We are talking about SPD Chancellor in Germany doing this. I mean, it was unthinkable a few days ago.
Yeah.
So war has this ability to make possible things that were not possible before. And that's very important to remember. If you go back to 9/11, if I had said at that time that before Christmas this year, Norwegian forces will be fighting in the mountains in Afghanistan, I would have been looked upon as a lunatic. And a few days later, it was almost obvious that we couldn't avoid that happening. So I also wrote this morning, actually, about the history shows that wars are so unpredictable. They will always take you to places you never expected to end up. And now Putin is walking down that road. He's taking the rest of the world with him, of course, in many different ways. But you cannot go back. You are on the road to somewhere. Yeah. And it ends up in places you never wanted to be.
Well, I'm really glad you brought in Germany, because I've had that as some notes as well, because that was the kind of shift in German foreign policy towards Russia is vastly different. I mean, from sending, 5,000 helmets to now sending Stingers and some real hardware to help in the fight. But also we've seen, and this is just over the weekend, right? So this is, it's Sunday morning for you, Sunday evening for me. It's only been the last kind of 48 hours, but we've seen the Russian stock market fall by 40% even on Friday. Now the sanctions have really tightened up. We've seen the agreements by even countries like Germany on the exclusion of a number of Russian banks from the SWIFT financial system, which of course is going to have a huge impact not only on Russia, but of course on Europe, because transactions for the gas that they so much need are settled using SWIFT. What are your thoughts on that? Because that obviously that's a big shift, and of course gas and Nord Stream 2, the kind of entire energy sector, are a hugely important part. And you spoke about this at length, Wolfgang. So maybe we'll start with you. But what do you think is the at play here, and what is the potential cost that we can expect?
Yeah, just one sentence before I start on the energy, and that's on this beautiful quote by Arne, that war makes it possible to go. Basically, war makes it possible for things to happen that you never thought would be possible before. And I contend, and he said, you're always on a road to somewhere. You maybe don't know yet, but you're on the road to somewhere. I would contend that Mr. Putin is on the road to his own downfall with this war. And that's particularly when, if and when a larger assault on Kiev happens. Let us not forget that Kiev is the city which Russians, as well as Ukrainians, rightly so, both of them, regard as the founding city of their own mythical statehood, where there are unbelievable amount of family relations here and there. So if, and I really hope this won't happen, larger urban fighting, Grozny style, breaks out in Kiev, I think this may have completely unforeseen consequences, also including for Mr. Putin himself. But now to the energy question. One has to look into this SWIFT. I mean, there is one key question. The key question is, can Europe and Germany continue to pay for the gas that it receives from Russia? I haven't looked into I think nobody really has looked into the detail of the SWIFT sanctions. But what I have heard also by President von der Leyen is that not all Russian banks and all companies are actually affected by that. And I know that Germany, up to yesterday, were working very hard in a way where they said they have to design SWIFT sanctions so that the right ones are hit, which you can translate, we have to design SWIFT sanctions that are the right ones so that we can still pay for our gas. And I think if that, and they may have succeeded with that. So that in the short run may not be, the dreaded problem that, the day after tomorrow, the gas will stop flowing. I don't think that's the case. Now on Nord Stream 2, it's actually, there's a couple of aspects that need to be added that are usually not in the media. Aspect number one. Nord Stream 2 has not been cancelled. It has been suspended. Suspended. That means so no decision for the time being. No positive decision for the time being. Now, one needs to know, to put this into context, is that the decision by the German authority that would have decided on Nord Stream 2 would have given the last legal opinion, the Bundesnetzagentur. This decision would not have been there anyway, likely before July, end of June, July. So in the very short term, this decision on Nord Stream means nothing. It's a political statement, but in reality, it has no real meaning. Right. Now, let us also not forget, this Nord Stream decision was taken before the all-out assault, with the all-out assault. So while I would have believed that after that decision, if, Russia would have stayed in the Donbass or would have continued some cyber, what President Biden so historically called a minor incursion, it would have been possible for Germany to go back in the summer once things have calmed down, say, yes, well, it's needed, etc. I am not sure that after this development, with a full-out assault on Ukraine, it is still possible to go back on the Nord Stream pipeline. And this pipeline will actually be, it doesn't need to be constructed anymore. It is constructed, will actually be commissioned, and will actually transport gas by the time being. Nevertheless, what is not impossible, what is still not impossible, even given the assault, and here I want to look a little bit in the future and also topics beyond energy. Every war at some point has to end with diplomacy, with some kind of diplomacy. So while we're not seeing much of that now, at some point we are going to see some kind of diplomacy that will and that will end the fighting, for better or for worse, in this or the other way. And here I say, to have a tool like Nord Stream 2 in our toolbox in the context of such a potential diplomatic solution is not bad for the West. It's not a bad thing for the West. So I think the German decision came at the right time. It doesn't mean anything for now, for immediate gas deliveries, and it adds an arrow to our arsenal. Our being the West, I don't associate personally, but to the Western arsenal. So that's what I believe, and I think it's good that Germany has done that. But I also do not think it's off the table for good.
Yeah. Arne, your thoughts? I saw you taking some notes. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I basically agree with what Wolfgang said about this. I mean, it was back in the 70s, I think, written a book called that Every War Must End. And of course, based upon history, every war ends. At least, as Morgenthau said, that battle and wars come to an end, but the political competition will continue. So I will agree to that, of course. The question is what will happen in the weeks, months, and maybe years ahead before that happens. And it's kind of difficult to predict right now, but it seems to be hard to think that Putin will be able to end this war on favorable terms for Russia. It's going to be exceptionally difficult, and I agree with what Wolfgang said. I mean, he could be on this road to the dead end for the regime, and this possibility, I think, it's been there all the time, and I've written about that and also said several times in lectures that I was pretty sure that Putin was aware of this possibility, that war could actually turn out to threaten the regime. And I think the potential now is more visible than it was before this all-out assault. Yeah. I would also say that something that could threaten even the regime in Beijing was a failed attack on Taiwan. And that could happen. I mean, wars are unpredictable. And Putin, given his interest for history, should know that very well. So, yes, it's...
absolutely. And I think... Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen the Russian military's inability to conduct a joint warfare really played out, had a major role. I mean, the lack of coordination between the various assets and the ground, the air and sea-based assets. I think that's certainly something that many Western thinkers are taking lessons from as well, the importance and, of course, logistics. We've seen their tanks stranded, running out of petrol. Just before we pivot onto the kind of future, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on the kind of possible scenarios, just sticking with this kind of economic piece and keen to hear what you think, because some analysts are saying that the freezing of the transactions for the Russian central bank, which is making it impossible for them to liquidate their assets, given the reserves of whatever 630 billion or something, the reserves that Russia has actually managed to kind of hoard in preparation for whatever's coming over the past years. Some are saying that this is actually the biggest danger right now, that these assets or the liquidation of these assets might be frozen, therefore making it completely unviable economically for Russia to survive. What are your thoughts on that? Have you got any thoughts? I mean, given that I'm not sure how strong you are economically, or I'm certainly not, but I'd be keen to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll let Wolfgang go on that one. It's difficult.
Well, this is certainly an extremely effective measure. But with the Russians, I mean, the size of the Russian, as we call it sometimes, rainy day fund has always been very, very large and legendary. And that was actually the reason why Putin claimed not to be really afraid of sanctions in the short run, because he had so much money actually to counteract the effects of any potential sanctions. Now, in how far the current sanctions actually make it impossible for Russia to access this money, I think is a question that is much more difficult and lies very much in the detail. It lies very much in the detail of the actual makeup of this fund. I want to remind you that these sanctions are not sanctions by the United Nations Security Council, where every country in the world is bound by. These are sanctions by the European Union. Probably by the United States. So they do not make it difficult to conduct financial transactions with Chinese banks, to sell something on the Chinese market, to sell something on the market in Singapore, to liquidate positions that are held in gold on the world market. So while the assets of the Russian central bank may be affected, will be affected, the extent to which this is the case, I think, is unknown to basically anybody except, maybe the head of the Russian central bank, or maybe some other very few people who knows exactly how their assets are structured around the planet.
You do bring in an important dimension to this, and that's of course China. And I had some notes on that as well to touch on, because we do know that as recent as the Olympics, Xi and Putin have declared I forget the phrasing, but a special relationship of a kind where nothing's off the table. And of course China hasn't is one of the few nations that hasn't blamed Russia for an invasion. How superficial do you see that relationship? Because we do know that it's also a fragile relationship, but how superficial do you see it at the moment? And do you consider that pseudo-alliance, obviously not official one, but do you see that as a real threat going forward?
Arne, why don't you go first?
Okay, let's... of course, I'm not an expert on China, Russia, but I try to follow that as closely as possible. And during the Olympics, I mean, the optics, of course, seen from both leaders, were that they wanted to convey a message of unity. So they do have areas of common interest. Of course, they do. But on the other hand, I read some pieces of Mark Galeotti over time, and he is quite skeptical about the substance of this relationship, and he's not the only one. We should remember that Ukraine is actually more important when it comes to commerce with China than Russia is, just to start. And the size of what's being bought and sold from China to the European Union is about 10 times the size of whatever is going on between China and Russia. And there are some signals coming out of Beijing. I mean, even at the Munich Security Conference, some of the signals where they are not that happy with what's going on, because they see some dark skies on the horizon that could affect also China negatively. And so for sure there will be limits to the support Russia can expect from China. And I also read, I think it was in Bloomberg, an estimate of this pipeline of natural gas. I mean, it's not even close to replace what Russia is selling to Western Europe. And in addition, we are talking about something that's about a decade into the future before it's actually going to deliver something of interest. And of course, at the end of the day, I mean, Russia should know better than anyone that China doesn't have allies. China have vassals. Well, I mean, suzerainty is what they look at. And of course, I mean, I'm sure that there are many Kremlins that really don't want to be a vassal state in the relationship to China. And this war is going to make Russia a lot more dependent on China. No doubt about it. And that was also one of the reasons why I doubted Putin would actually do what he has been doing. Because at the end of the day, when the dust settles, he is more, not only more, I mean, much more dependent on China than he is today. And that's also a risk that I would expect him to have calculated into the equation. But didn't seem to pay attention to that.
Didn't seem to stop him. Wolfgang?
A couple of points on Russia, China. First point, I think that China is watching very closely how the West reacts to that invasion of Ukraine, because that will teach them how much actually can be done short of a full-scale military intervention. And that doesn't only include sanctions by the European Union and by the United States governments, but that includes things such as what Facebook is doing, what Google is doing, what Twitter is doing, what Elon Musk is doing. As we said, we live in a very interconnected world. So the sanctions are no longer coming only from what the sports world is doing, excluding them from events, etc. So I think they will be watching this very closely. Second point, I think what we are seeing here is very much a expression of what I would call the absence of Chinese foreign policy from non-Asian topics. There is no such thing as a really consistent Chinese foreign policy on topics and issues that are not within Asia or directly impact Asia. So we are seeing them really sitting on the fence on this one, trying to, remain as much as possible out of it. They abstained from the vote in the United Nations Security Council, condemning Russia for that. They are speaking in their press conferences about things like all sides should exercise maximum restraint. Well, I wonder how you actually exercise restraint if you're being invaded. This is very difficult to kind of imagine. So it's not a very, I think they're really taking it step by step, and they're really developing their foreign policy in a very cautious way as they go along. Third point, Arne made that point regarding a Russia-China partnership. One thing Russia knows very well, in a Russian-Chinese partnership, they may not be a vassal, but they will be the junior partner. And Russia does not want to be a junior partner with anyone. They really don't want to be a junior partner with anyone. So there are all these strategic issues that are quite, how should I say, tense, unclear. Nothing really points in the direction of a great partnership of, sorry to say, makes me laugh, of values, of maybe they be different from. So what Russia and China are doing now, and I think there is an agreement on this, they are engaging in a 100% transactional relationship, in a relationship that is a zero-sum game. If you have something that you can do for my interest, let's do it. If we don't share a joint interest, we do something completely different. 100% transaction, 100% zero sum, demonstrated by, let us quickly recall that Russia chose to transmit their, I will spare with an adjective, their offer for negotiations with Ukraine via the Chinese Foreign Ministry. I think that suited everybody. The Chinese Foreign Ministry had a role to play as a intermediary on the world stage, which they also like. Russia needed somebody who does that for them. And after basically all their allies, including Kazakhstan, close ally, whom they've helped militarily just weeks ago, has made it crystal clear that they don't want to have to do anything with that Russian invasion. China is very nicely usable for that. But the great Russian-Turkish alliance, or as they call it, the dragon bear, the scary dragon bear, I don't see born just yet. But of course, lastly, it's also a challenge for the West, because whether this dragon bear actually comes into existence as much is very much also a question of how the West will conduct foreign policy over the next, over the next strategic period.
Well, also, didn't Turkey close access to the Black Sea for the Russian Navy fleet?
Which they did it.
Yeah, I think I read that happened. So that also then makes that relationship a lot more tense as well going
the
forward.
Turkish one.
Yeah.
With Turkey and Russia, it's also I've observed this Turkish-Russian relationship for nearly a decade. I mean, I used to live in Baku, which is on the which is really the mixture between the Turkic and the Russian world. That's also a 100% transaction relationship. And at the moment, I think Mr. Erdogan is, Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Putin have had a number of excellent meetings, where it suits their joint interest. They have been, like lockstep. And I now think Mr. Erdogan has been seeing that Russia is on the losing, in the medium term, on the losing side of this. And he may be very well advised to be with his NATO partners and to be very clear that he is with his NATO partners. That decision is a big one. I don't know how Russia will react, because that's really a big decision. And I wanted to bring this up, but now you have brought it up as really something to watch. What's going to go on in the Bosporus? Again, we'll have to see more in detail what it actually means. For which ship it is closed, only commercial warships, what size, etc., etc. What reasons are given. But that's something we really need to take a look at. But this is so fresh. This just happened yesterday. I haven't really looked at it in detail yet.
Arne, did you want to add something to?
I mean, I certainly agree with Wolfgang, and I'm happy you brought it up, because I think that's an exceptional important decision, and of course Turkey has had a problem with balancing their interest for quite some time, and also that should be obvious to Mr. Putin that now, I mean, Turkey will have to get more into the embrace of NATO again. And another option would look quite silly seen from Ankara. And I think I was tweeting, or maybe it was on LinkedIn, I wrote, when Putin recognized the two so-called republics in Donbass a few days ago, I mean, that's really a cold shower for both Ankara and for Baku. I mean, in less than 4 years, the so-called agreement, if it is an agreement about the so-called Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, will have to be decided again. So what happens if Putin recognizes Nagorno-Karabakh as an independent state and the so-called peacekeepers turn into occupation forces in Azerbaijan territory proper? I mean, what's the issue for Baku and also for the credibility of Ankara? I mean, they're sitting in the cold rain now and thinking about that option. If they don't do, I mean, they are not looking into the future the way they should be from both capitals.
I mean, it seems as though this action by, I mean, let's call it what it is, by Putin. I mean, yes, it's Russia, but it's driven by one man. Has the potential to kind of untangle a lot of these complex issues, or at least bring them to light, and hopefully, as you both are alluding to, and we're seeing, galvanize the West, unite NATO beyond to what it has been. So what do you see as the way forward? I mean, what options does Putin have? can we agree on one, and that is that he is really unlikely, because it would be, well, damn near suicidal. He is unlikely to take the conflict beyond Ukraine into any NATO state. Would you both agree with that?
For the time being, yes.
Yeah.
I would predict that he could put pressure on the states that border Russia, like the Baltic and also my own country Norway.
Right.
Countries with a common border with Russia should watch out.
Yeah,
and the discussion is already going in Norway. What are the implications for the bilateral relationship between Norway and Russia up north? I mean, obviously, if you want to make a prediction, for sure we can say it's not going to be improved. That can be guaranteed. The other that's also very likely is that it will not be affected. For sure, it will be affected, and that means the only question remaining is how bad will it be, and in which way will it be bad? And that's basically where Norway is right now.
Yeah, and so what remains? Yeah, sorry, Wolfgang, jump in, please.
Well, my prediction is on this front, I think this is still completely open, and it will depend very much on how this adventure is going for Putin.
And is it down to Kiev? Is it down to Kiev? I mean, if he gets Kiev and puts his own government or Russia-friendly government in, is that the kind of immediate objective that he's looking for? That's one of the kind of branches, I guess.
That is the objective for sure. That's what code denazification stands for. But I do not believe this is an achievable goal. I think this goal is completely unrealistic because whomever Mr. Putin will put in charge of the government in Kiev, he will not be able to govern. He will not. It will certainly be a he. I guarantee you this.
Yes.
He will not be able to govern because the population will be in complete resistance. Kiev is a city that's very used to protests. It's probably the most protest-prone city in the world these days. So there will be millions and millions of people out in the streets on a daily basis.
And backed by the world, backed by the entire world.
Backed by the world, receiving intelligence by the world, receiving economic support by the world. So I think this is an unachievable goal. I believe that this may be sinking in also again at some point in Russia, and that they will probably be looking for an exit scenario. And I think that some kind of exit scenario may come, but it really depends on the psychology of one man who has not, let's say, improved in decision-making, whose decision-making has really, really, really degraded over the past months.
And that's the scary part, I guess, because the rational thing would be to try and seek negotiations, mediation, because there was even whispers of that, or first meeting in Minsk, then Warsaw. It's kind of fallen off the table, even though both sides still claim that they want to pursue negotiations, but we don't hear any more of it. So that would be the rational thing to do. But as we've seen, he's no longer a rational actor. Arne, any thoughts?
Well,
and one sorry on that.
Please finish and then I'll jump in.
One sentence. This decision that Putin has taken now is such a departure from foreign policy decisions he has taken in the past. I mean, we all agree on the illegality and on the immorality of what he has done in Crimea, what he has done in the Donbass, what he has done in Syria. We all know what he has done in Chechnya. I mean, we all agree that these were horrible things to do. But the difference is they were executed in a very smart way. And he won all these games. They were executed in a smart, analyzable, and rational, darkly rational way. I believe this incursion into Ukraine is done in a very criminally stupid way.
Emotion, yeah.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And with what you say, Wolfgang, now is the reason why I didn't expect this to happen. For sure, I expected Putin to carry on some kind of political warfare, war by proxies, and all that we know very well that has been going on. But I considered him to be a more careful player than this. And your description of this decision is actually what surprises me a lot, that he made that decision. So, and now, of course, we are into a completely different world. And Putin should know better than most other that quite often after the Second World War, military power has not been able to deliver the political results that leaders have been wishing for or trying to achieve. Even the power of the US has turned out not to be enough. And I do agree with Wolfgang about the scenario that a Russian-friendly government in Kiev could govern anything. They could govern within areas occupied by Russian forces. But as alluded to some minutes ago, today, that's just a tiny fraction of Ukrainian territory. And it will be a tiny fraction of it. If we go back in history, in Norway, my own country, in 1940, we had about 3 million people. At the most, Nazi Germany had almost 400,000 occupation troops in Norway to keep it kind of calm. But still, sabotage happened. And when the Soviet Union, Russia, entered into Czechoslovakia in 1968, the first wave was 250,000. And that was against a small country with 14 million people. And in the weeks following up to that, another 250,000 came in. And they were not even making resistance. And still, you need in this amount of troops to control the area. So this idea, I think that Mr. Putin entertains, that he can, in a way, get Ukraine, as it looks today, to fall under the influence of Russia by having a friendly government in Kiev, is complete madness. At the worst, this could look like Syria after some time. Different areas are under control of. The capital is just controlling a fraction of the country. The rest of the country will be either under government, will be governed by the present government, the legal authorities of Ukraine, from some other place in the West. That could be a possible scenario. And I had a quick estimate yesterday about the possibilities for Ukrainian insurgency, if that is going to be going on for a long time. NATO countries have about 1,400 kilometers of common border with Russia. And one of the main absolutely important criteria for an insurgency is a safe place to return to, and that would be the country. And it would be impossible to, prevent forces to trickle in both direction over this border to NATO. And also Belarus should remember that they have a long common border with Poland. And Belarus has actually entered the war now by allowing cruise missiles to be fired from their territory. I got a WhatsApp message from Kiev about that just a few minutes ago. So here we are looking into something that will be most likely very messy and very difficult. And this kind of clean fall of Ukraine under the influence, whole of Ukraine as it is now, under the influence of Moscow is really very, very unlikely to happen. So he is in for some difficult times.
Well, let's hope he takes the option that's available to him. And if I do recall, and things might have changed, but Zelenskyy did express that, and US supported it, that Ukraine can choose the non-aligned option. That was in the lead up to the supposed negotiations. I mean, that certainly, if that is still an option to end the fighting now, then that is something that Putin still can consider. You're shaking your head, Wolfgang. What's your thoughts?
My thought on this is that the neutral option, and I know that my Ukrainian friends have criticized me for, a decade for this. I've always thought that the neutral option for Ukraine would be a viable one, would be one that should be considered. I think this is now off the table.
Yeah.
I think after what happened now, non-aligned or neutrality is simply not an option anymore.
Well, I guess that and maybe bringing it to the end as well, just the last couple of thoughts, maybe, because that brings up a point, and there's been quite a few calls, even from some leaders. I'm pretty sure I did see wasn't it Andrzej Duda that actually supported it as well publicly on Twitter, the Polish president, to expedite admission into the European Union of Ukraine. Do you think that is pouring fuel on the fire right now, given what's happening? I mean, the bombs are going off and people are dying.
Well, if I may answer that, I think, unfortunately, this an integration into the European Union is not possible for matters that have nothing to do with the war. It has to do. I mean, the European Union is not like NATO, where you can be for, let's say, political or reasons to demonstrate something to others. The European Union means deep economic integration. In terms of deep economic integration, the EU is currently not even able to get through the accession of Montenegro and North Macedonia with 800,000, 1 million people. Yeah. So I think a full EU membership of Ukraine is just not really. Is not a realistic thing. Does not look like a realistic thing at the moment. Yet, I will make a caveat again with Arne, who said war makes things possible that we never thought were possible. So who knows?
Yeah. Arne, any thoughts?
Yeah, Wolfgang and myself, we are very much aligned along this thinking about Ukraine. Let me briefly return to this neutral, non-aligned kind of thing. Then that's probably the area where I've been slightly more pessimistic than Wolfgang expressed. And I don't think that Putin could live with a neutral and non-aligned, prosperous Ukraine anyway, because that's a model that Russia would look to. And so I don't think that's an option. And if Ukraine should be non-aligned and neutral, it also would mean that Putin couldn't influence it, couldn't have any rights there. So I would be kind of pessimistic, and now I for sure agree with Wolfgang. That's definitely down the drain, no doubt about that. But also, if we look back, we should remember that in 2010, after Yanukovych was elected in Kiev, it was entered again into the Ukrainian constitution, non-alignment and being neutral. And I was in senior positions in NATO over 6 years during these times. And I mean, Ukrainian membership in NATO was a joke. Nobody could even imagine that possibility. And the percentage in Ukraine that would support it was far below 30%. Today, it's more than 60%. So, and that's because of Russia's policy towards Ukraine. And in 2014, Russia actually attacked and annexed Crimea and attacked the Donbas area. And back then, Ukraine, when that happened, was neutral and non-aligned in the constitution. It was changed. The constitution was changed in December 2014. And of course, it was reinforced again in 2019 about the Western orientation of Ukraine. And that's part of my reason why I also didn't believe Putin would do something this stupid as he's doing now. He knew that Ukraine, as Wolfgang rightfully pointed out, the membership was not on the table.
It was nothing
in NATO or in the European Union. And nobody could even imagine that possibility. And nobody could even imagine the possibility that NATO would deploy troops to Ukraine or missiles or whatever. That was really not, even in fantasies of people, that didn't. So basically, he had things the way he should like to have it. But obviously, it was not enough.
Well, that's a rather dark way to end it, but I guess it's reflective of the reality on the ground and the fact that, that doesn't leave too many more options apart from the one that I think you pointed out, Wolfgang, as a fear of yours, that we've got some much darker days ahead. And of course, you've alluded to it from the military perspective of the firepower as well, Arne. So I think if I'm reading between the lines of what you're both saying, or not even between the lines, what you're both saying is that it's about to get a lot uglier rather than better in the near term. Any final thoughts, gentlemen? I'm conscious how much time you've given me, but any final thoughts?
Well, briefly, I think that we're pretty sure we'll see a withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces from Donbass, because they have been holding in the line, in the areas of the line of contact so far. And from my military perspective, there is no reason to keep such a huge bulk of the forces in that area. And also they could end up being encircled from the north and from the south.
As well, yeah.
So I would expect that to be a decision that is discussed in the general staff in Kiev as we speak. And of course, it must have been planned to how to withdraw those very potent forces and to shorten and straightening the front line so that you are not encircled from the north and from the south, because those forces are the better part of the Ukrainian armed forces, and they will for sure be needed in other places and also in areas of higher priority than being located along the line of contact. That, I think, ends my deliberate.
Yeah. And battle-hardened forces too. Wolfgang, any closing remarks?
Well, I would like to close with two anecdotes and stories that just, from the past days, and maybe not so much on the darkest of terms, but that gives you maybe a little bit of hope. Yesterday, I was sitting outside in Brussels on Place Sainte-Catherine, and there was a large group of Russian speakers on the next table. And so I was kind of eavesdropping a little bit, and soon it became clear it's a group of both Russians and Ukrainians. There were Russians and Ukrainians sitting together, obviously friends, discussing the situation, what's going on, all very concerned. And everybody was, I think, a majority of Russians and 2 or 3 Ukrainians, in total like 8 people. Everybody was of the opinion that Putin has gone mad and that what he's doing is an absolute crime. And so there continues to be no inter-ethnic element in this fight, in a big departure from what we've seen in the Yugoslav war. So there is no inter-ethnic element here, and there continues not to be, and that's a good thing. And the second thing, I would like to read to you a message I just received during this podcast from a friend in Moscow, who is a very prominent person, so I will not mention his name. So he says, "Hi, Wolfgang, we talked about, messaging from abroad to support civil society, etc." He says, "It's hard to say what messaging from abroad could help at this point. This was started by Russia and we'll have to sort it out, as well as face the consequences. I really hope anti-war voices will grow. This is pure madness." And I think I couldn't say it better than my Moscow friend. My thoughts are with my friends, both in Moscow and in Ukraine. Let's hope for the best.
On that note, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time once again. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Voices of War. And since you got this far, please consider showing your support by liking and reviewing the show wherever you catch your pods. Also, if you're able, please consider showing your support through our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page. Links to both are in the show notes. Thank you, and until next time.